They say the law is equal, that it weighs every man and every woman on the same scale, with the same blind eyes and the same steady hand. But in Judge Harold Pierce's courtroom in Harlan County, the scale had a thumb on it. And that thumb had a name, a badge number, and a record of 47 arrests in the last 22 months. Every single one of them black, every single one of them poor, and every single one of them signed off by the man on the bench without so much as a second glance. Everyone in Harlan County knew how it worked. If Officer Edward Swanson arrested you, you were going down. It didn't matter what you said. It didn't matter what you could prove. It didn't matter if you had witnesses, receipts, an alibi written in the hand of God himself. The moment Swanson's name appeared on the report, Judge Pierce reached for his rubber stamp. That was the system. That was the deal. And for 11 years, not one person had broken it. Until the morning a silver-haired woman in a brown hoodie walked through the side door of courtroom 7 and sat in the very last row. Judge Pierce glanced at her once. Old black woman. Worn sneakers. Hoodie with a frayed zipper. She looked like someone's grandmother who had taken a wrong turn on the way to the DMV. He looked away immediately. She wasn't even worth cataloging. That was his first mistake. It would not be his last. What Harold Pierce did not know, what no one in that courtroom could have imagined, was that the woman in the brown hoodie had spent 31 years on the federal bench, that she had written opinions quoted in law schools from Harvard to Howard, that she had 2 United States senators who answered her calls before the second ring, that she had been watching Officer Edward Swanson's file for 18 months, building a case so airtight it could survive a Category 5 hurricane and still hold water. She had not come to Harlan County to beg for her son's freedom. She had come to collect what was owed to Marcus, to the 46 others, and to every family Swanson had ever shattered with a fabricated report and a smug smile. Judge Pierce thought he was looking at nobody. He was looking at the last person who would ever underestimate him. The Harlan County Courthouse smelled the way injustice always smells, like old paper, industrial floor cleaner, and the particular brand of anxiety that settles into a room when people know the outcome before the proceedings even begin. The overhead lights buzzed with a persistent, irritating hum, the kind that burrowed into your skull after 20 minutes and made everything feel slightly unreal. 3 of the 4 ceiling fans were broken. The 4th spun so slowly it was essentially decorative. Rebecca West sat in the last row of courtroom 7, her hands folded over a slim manila envelope in her lap, and she watched. She was 67 years old. With deep mahogany skin and natural silver hair, she kept clothes cropped and clean. No fuss, no performance. She had the kind of face that had earned its lines honestly, carved by decades of hard thinking and harder decisions. Today she wore a plain brown zip-up hoodie, dark jeans, and a pair of white sneakers that had seen better days. She had driven 4 hours from her home in Richmond without stopping, because she hadn't trusted herself to stop. If she stopped moving, she might start feeling. And right now, feeling would have to wait. She was here to work. Her eyes moved around the room the way they always had, deliberate, unhurried, cataloging. The bailiff near the door, a thick-necked man named Garrett, was leaning against the wall scrolling through his phone with the practiced disinterest of someone who had long since stopped registering the human faces around him. The court clerk, a young woman named Patrice, was shuffling a stack of folders with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had learned not to read the names on the tabs. And at the front of the room, Officer Edward Swanson sat in the witness box like a man at his own birthday party. Relaxed, broad-shouldered, wearing the comfortable expression of someone who had never once been doubted in a room like this. Rebecca had read Swanson's file so many times she could have recited it from memory. 47 arrests in 22 months. 0 wrongful arrest complaints that had made it past the precinct intake desk. Commendation from the mayor in March. A profile piece in the Harlan Courier that called him a community cornerstone. She had read it all. She had also read the 47 case files underneath those commendations, and what she found there had made something cold and ancient shift in her chest. the specific weight of a system working exactly as it had been designed to work, against exactly the people it had been designed to crush. At the bench, Judge Harold Pierce was already talking. Pierce was a lean man in his mid-50s, with the kind of angular, patrician face that photographed well and reasoned poorly. He had thin sandy hair he kept neatly parted, and pale blue eyes that had the peculiar quality of seeming to look straight through whoever stood before him, not because he saw more than other men, but because he registered less. He spoke in a flat, efficient drawl that carried the assumption of authority the way some men carry cologne. Laid on thick, impossible to ignore, designed to announce itself before he entered the room. Rebecca had heard about Pierce the same way she'd heard about Swanson, through Marcus. Her son had been arrested 3 times in 2 years. The first time, she had believed it when they told her it was a misunderstanding. The second time, she had hired a lawyer. The third time, 2 weeks ago, 11:47 on a Tuesday night, Marcus calling from a holding cell with fabricated evidence on a resisting arrest charge. She had sat very still in her kitchen in Richmond for a long time, her phone on the table, the call already ended. Then she had stood up, walked to her study, pulled the Swanson file from the locked drawer where she had been building it for 18 months, and set it on the desk in front of her. She had told her former clerks she was taking a leave of absence for personal reasons. She had not told them she was coming to Harlan County. She had not told them that the personal reason was also a professional one, and that the two had finally become impossible to separate. Marcus was her son. He was also the 38th name in a pattern that had been hiding in plain sight for almost 2 years. She was done pretending those were different problems. She had driven to Harlan County as his mother. She was sitting in this courtroom as something else entirely. "Next case," Pierce announced, barely glancing up from the paper before him. His tone carried the particular boredom of a man who had long since stopped distinguishing between the files on his desk and the human beings those files described. Garrett the bailiff straightened up long enough to call Marcus West's case number. Rebecca watched her son stand at the defense table, tall, composed, wearing the careful stillness of a man who had learned not to give a room like this any ammunition. He was 34 years old, and he moved with the contained dignity that broke her heart a little every time she saw it. The specific discipline of a black man who had grown up knowing that the wrong posture in the wrong room could cost him everything. She kept her face neutral. She kept her hands still. Swanson took the stand. His testimony was smooth, rehearsed, airtight in the specific way that fabricated testimony always was. Too clean, too sequential, the kind of account that had been assembled rather than remembered. Rebecca listened to every word. She had been listening to testimony for 31 years. She could hear the architecture of a lie the way a musician hears a missed note. Not just that something was wrong, but precisely where it had gone wrong and why. She reached into the manila envelope in her lap and touched the document inside without removing it. Body cam timestamp analysis. She had had it reviewed by 2 independent forensic consultants. The timeline Swanson was currently reciting under oath was incompatible with the footage by 11 minutes and 40 seconds. 11 minutes and 40 seconds in which the events Swanson was describing could not physically have occurred in the location he was describing them. She put the document back. Not yet. Pierce was already leaning back in his chair with the easy confidence of a man watching a film he had seen before, already certain of the ending. He had rubber-stamped Swanson's last 31 arrests. He would rubber-stamp this one too, and Marcus would be processed into a system that would hold him for months before anyone with the right credentials looked closely enough to ask the questions that needed asking. Unless someone asked those questions first. Rebecca West stood up. The room didn't notice her at first. She was a woman in a brown hoodie in the back row, and rooms like this had been trained not to see women in brown hoodies unless they were on the wrong side of the bar. She spoke clearly without raising her voice. "Your Honor, the testimony being entered into the record contains a material timeline discrepancy that has been documented and verified by 2 independent forensic analysts. I'm requesting that this court allow that analysis to be entered as evidence before any ruling is made." The room went quiet in the way rooms do when something unexpected has happened and no one is sure yet how to classify it. Pierce turned and looked at her for the first time. Really looked, the way you look at something that has committed the offense of interrupting you. His eyes moved from her sneakers to her hoodie to her face, and something settled in his expression that Rebecca had seen before. The particular expression of a man who has decided, in the space of a single second, exactly what category of person he is dealing with and exactly how much of his attention that category deserves. He smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Ma'am," Pierce said, leaning into his microphone in a way that suggested he was performing for the room rather than addressing her. "This is a courtroom, not a town hall, not a Facebook comment section. Whoever told you that you could walk in off the street and interrupt official proceedings did you a serious disservice." A few polished laughs from the attorney's row. Garrett the bailiff smirked at his shoes. "Now I don't know what your connection is to the defendant, but I'm going to need you to sit down and be quiet, or I'm going to need you to leave. Those are your two options. Which would you prefer?" Rebecca did not sit down. The Sixth Amendment guarantees the right to confront evidence used against a defendant, she said, still without raising her voice. A verified forensic analysis of the arresting officer's own body camera footage constitutes directly relevant evidence. Excluding it without review would be an abuse of judicial discretion. The laughs from the attorney's row stopped. One of the lawyers, a heavy-set man named Carroll who had been practicing in Harlan County for 20 years and had never once heard anyone speak to Harold Pierce that way, who was still standing afterward, turned in his seat and looked at her with something between curiosity and alarm. Pierce's expression had shifted. The performance was still there, but something underneath it had flickered. He had not expected the vocabulary. He had not expected the citation. He recovered quickly, the way vain men always do, by doubling down. "Lady," he said flatly, all pretense of courtesy gone now, "I don't know where you got a law dictionary, but quoting amendments at me in my courtroom is not a legal argument. It's a waste of everybody's time. I've been on this bench for 11 years. I do not need a woman in a—" He gestured vaguely at her hoodie, and the contempt in the gesture was precise and practiced. "Whatever that is, explaining constitutional law to me. Bailiff, remove her, and run her name. People who talk like that in street clothes are usually running from something." Rebecca looked at him for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "Judge Pierce, you are making a decision right now that I would strongly encourage you to reconsider." Pierce laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, dismissive, almost delighted. The laugh of a man who found defiance amusing when it came from someone he believed could not back it up. "Is that a threat?" "It's a professional courtesy," Rebecca said. "One you're going to wish you'd accepted." Pierce's gavel hit the wood. 30 days. Contempt. Get her out of my courtroom. Garrett took her arm. Rebecca did not resist. She let him steer her toward the holding area with the calm of a woman who had made this decision in advance and had no intention of revisiting it. As they reached the side door, she turned once and looked back at Pierce. Not with anger, not with fear, but with the specific, patient expression of a person who knows exactly how a story ends and is simply waiting for the other participants to catch up. Pierce was already reaching for the next file. He did not see the expression on her face. If he had, he might have asked Garrett to stop. He might have asked her name. He might have done many things differently. He didn't. The door closed behind her. Upstairs, Pierce was untouchable. Downstairs, in the holding cell that smelled of mildew and institutional despair, Rebecca West sat on a metal bench with her back straight and her mind already 3 steps ahead, and she waited. They had taken her bag. They had taken her phone. They had not taken 18 months of documented evidence filed with the DOJ Civil Rights Division. They had not taken the federal judge she had mentored for 15 years, who was currently reading a 47-case analysis in his chambers in Washington. They had not taken the 2 journalists she had briefed the previous evening, who were right now sitting in the gallery of courtroom 7 with press credentials and recording devices. You could not strip a woman like Rebecca West of her weapons by taking her phone. Her weapons were in the record. They were in the timestamps. They were in the 47 files. And they were patient. In the cell across from her, a young woman named Destiny was crying quietly. Picked up on a warrant for a parking citation she swore she had paid. An older woman named Gloria sat with her arms folded, watching Rebecca with shrewd, tired eyes. "What did they get you for?" Gloria asked. "Contempt," Rebecca said. Gloria snorted. "You talked back to Pierce. Woman, what were you thinking?" Rebecca looked at her. "I was thinking clearly for the first time in a long time." Gloria studied her. Something in the older woman's face made her pause. Not the calm exactly, but the quality of it. The way she sat, the way she spoke, the sense that the holding cell had not diminished her by one single degree. "They're not going to do anything," Gloria said. "Not unkindly, just flat. Pierce and Swanson, they're in each other's pockets. You can holler all you want from down here. Nobody upstairs is listening." "Someone is," Rebecca said. "Who?" Rebecca was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Destiny, still crying in the corner. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Destiny." "How long have you been in here?" "Since yesterday morning." Rebecca nodded slowly. "When I make my phone call," she said, "I'll make sure your name is on the list." Gloria looked at her. "What list?" "The one that's going to matter," Rebecca said, and she said nothing more. Upstairs, in his chambers, Judge Harold Pierce was eating lunch and telling the story of the woman in the hoodie to his clerk, a patient man named Douglas who had heard worse. "Did you hear her?" Pierce said, cutting into a sandwich with unnecessary precision. "Citing the Sixth Amendment. Like I don't know the Sixth Amendment. 30 years I've been in law. She probably heard it on some podcast." He shook his head with the comfortable contempt of a man who had never once been genuinely challenged. "Where do they come from, Douglas? Where do they get the confidence?" Douglas said nothing. He had learned that Pierce's rhetorical questions were not actually questions. "Anyway," Pierce waved a hand. 30 days. Maybe that teaches her something about how a courtroom works." His desk phone rang. Douglas picked it up, listened for 3 seconds, and went slightly pale. "It's the governor's office," Douglas said. "And there's a second call holding. It's the Department of Justice." Pierce looked up from his sandwich. "The DOJ?" "Yes, sir." "What do they want?" Douglas swallowed. "They're asking about a woman you held in contempt this morning. A Ms. West." He paused. "But the man from the DOJ, he didn't call her Ms. West, sir." Pierce set down his fork. "What did he call her?" The silence in the room lasted exactly 4 seconds. "Judge West," Douglas said. "He called her Judge West. Federal. Retired. 31 years on the bench." Pierce did not move. The air conditioning unit in the corner of his chambers droned steadily. A pigeon knocked against the window ledge and startled away. Harold Pierce stared at his clerk for a long moment, and then he turned to his computer with the slow, mechanical deliberateness of a man walking toward something he would very much prefer not to see. He typed her name. The search results loaded in under 2 seconds. The first result was a formal biography from the federal judiciary website. The second was a Washington Post profile from 2019. The third was a photograph. A black woman in judicial robes, standing at a podium in a federal courthouse. Mid-sentence, her expression the precise fusion of authority and intelligence that takes decades to build and cannot be faked. She was wearing the same close-cropped silver hair. She had the same face. She was the woman he had just called Lady and thrown in a holding cell for contempt of court. Pierce read the bio. 31 years federal judiciary. Former professor at Howard University School of Law. 2 decades of civil rights litigation before her appointment. Known for her expertise in judicial misconduct and Fourth Amendment violations. He read it again. The color left his face in a single visible wave, starting at his forehead and moving downward until he sat behind his desk the color of old chalk. Douglas stepped back toward the door. "Get Garrett," Pierce said. His voice had lost every molecule of its earlier ease. It was thin now, pressurized, the voice of a man doing rapid damage calculations in real time. "Tell him to bring her up. Not back to the courtroom. Here. My chambers. Right now." "Yes, sir." "And Douglas." The clerk stopped. "Tell him to be respectful." Douglas left quickly, and Pierce sat alone in his chambers with the photograph on his screen and the 2 phone lines blinking on hold, and he understood, fully and without any remaining capacity for denial, that the woman he had laughed at this morning had not stumbled into his courtroom by accident. She had come for him. She had been ready for him before she walked through the door. And every mocking word, every contemptuous dismissal, every easy laugh he had performed for his courtroom audience had been caught, dated, time-stamped, and added to a file that already had 47 other names in it. He tried to straighten his tie. His hands were shaking so badly he knocked his water glass off the edge of his desk, and it shattered on the floor, and he stared at it for a long moment without moving to clean it up. In the basement, the cell door opened. Garrett stood in the frame. He was not smiling now. He was not scrolling his phone. He held Rebecca's bag in both hands, and he had the specific expression of a man who has recently learned something that has permanently rearranged his understanding of a situation. "Ms." He stopped. "Judge West." He said it carefully, the way you say something for the first time when you're not entirely sure you have the right to say it. "The judge would like to see you in his chambers." Rebecca looked at him without expression. She did not stand immediately. She let the silence sit for a moment the way a seasoned jurist lets a silence sit. Purposefully, communicatively, making clear that time in this room now moved on her terms. Then she stood, smoothed the front of her hoodie, and looked at Destiny, still curled in the corner of the bench. "Destiny," she said, "I haven't forgotten about you." She walked to the door. Garrett stepped aside to give her the full width of the frame, pressing himself flat against the wall as though she occupied more space than her physical body. He held her bag out toward her. "Your bag, Judge." "Keep it," she said. "I want both hands free." She walked out of the cell, and the corridor that had seemed ordinary 20 minutes ago rearranged itself around her as she moved through it. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The floor gleamed under the institutional light. Her sneakers made no sound on the linoleum. She was not walking to an apology. She was walking to the beginning of the accounting. And by the time she reached the elevator, Garrett was already 2 steps behind her, breathing quietly through his nose and not saying a single word. The elevator opened on the 3rd floor. At the end of the hall, the heavy oak door of Judge Pierce's chambers was slightly ajar, and through the gap, Rebecca could see the edge of a man who had spent 11 years being afraid of nothing and had discovered this morning, at the cost of everything, that he had been wrong. She walked toward it without hurrying. She had waited 31 years for a room like this. She was happy to take the last 30 seconds at her own pace. The call came at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. Rebecca was in her study, reading briefs she no longer had any professional obligation to read, because 31 years of habit does not dissolve simply because you hand in your robes. The room was quiet. The lamp on her desk threw a warm circle of light across the open pages, and outside the window Richmond was dark and still, and for a few hours she had managed to feel something close to peace. Then her phone rang, and Marcus's name appeared on the screen, and something in her chest recognized the hour before she even answered. "Mom!" His voice was compressed, contained in the specific way he had learned to contain himself in rooms where containment was survival. She could hear the acoustics of a hard, small space behind him. Concrete. Metal. She had heard those acoustics before. "I'm here," she said. "Swanson again." A pause. "Resisting arrest. They're saying Another pause. Shorter. The pause of a man deciding not to say what he actually wants to say. "It didn't happen the way they're writing it, Mom." She believed him without deliberation, the way you believe something you already know. Are you hurt?
No.
All right. She was already standing, already moving to the locked drawer in the left side of her desk. Don't say anything else tonight. Not to anyone. Mom. I know, baby. She pulled the drawer open. The Swanson file was exactly where she had left it. 18 months of careful, patient, meticulous work. I'm coming. She had been watching long enough. She arrived in Harlan County on a Wednesday morning, driving herself, no clerks, no aides, no one who knew her name or her history with this place. She checked into a roadside motel on the edge of town under her maiden name and hung her one good blazer in the narrow closet and left it there for the duration. She would not be needing it. She started with the neighborhood. She walked the 4 blocks between Marcus's apartment and the corner where Swanson claimed the arrest had occurred, and she walked them slowly, the way you walk a space when you are reading it rather than simply moving through it. She talked to a woman named Lorraine who ran a laundromat on Clement Street, who told her about her nephew. She talked to an old man named Curtis who sat on his porch every morning and had watched Swanson's patrol car idle in front of the same 3 houses for 2 years running. She wrote nothing down. She never wrote anything down in the field. She remembered. Then she went to the courthouse and sat in the public gallery for 3 hours, watching Pierce work through his docket with the mechanical efficiency of a man who had long since stopped distinguishing between cases and inconveniences. She counted the dismissals. She noted the patterns. She watched Swanson testify in 2 separate hearings and recognized, both times, the particular smoothness of a man reciting rather than recalling. She drove past the precinct at dusk and did not stop. She already had what she needed from the precinct. 47 arrest reports. 47 stories that did not quite hold together when you laid them side by side and looked at them in the light. She went back to the motel and opened the file. Marcus's hearing was set for 9 o'clock Thursday morning, and Rebecca was in her seat by 8:45. She sat in the last row of courtroom 7 in her brown hoodie and her worn sneakers with the manila envelope in her lap, and she watched the room fill the way she had watched 100 rooms fill before this one. Reading the dynamics, mapping the loyalties, cataloging who deferred to whom and why. The attorneys who greeted Pierce's clerk with practiced familiarity. The way Garrett the bailiff straightened incrementally each time the chamber door moved. The way Swanson carried himself to the witness box like a man walking onto a stage he had performed on many times and expected to perform on many times more. She let it go for 40 minutes. She let Swanson build his testimony, brick by careful brick, laying down a version of Tuesday night that had been engineered rather than experienced. She sat with her hands folded and her face neutral, and she listened to the architecture of it. And when Pierce began nodding with the reflexive approval of a man who had already decided, something in her chest drew tight and still. She stood up and spoke. She cited the discrepancy. She cited the amendment. She kept her voice level and her language precise, and for approximately 4 seconds the room processed the disconnect between what she looked like and what she was saying. Then Pierce laughed. It moved through the prosecution's row like a current. First the smirks, then the low chuckles, then Carroll from the attorney's bench turning in his seat with an expression caught somewhere between amusement and unease. Garrett's hand closed around her arm. She let him lead her out. She had what she came for. She was back in her seat by 8:30 Friday morning. Pierce saw her the moment he took the bench. Something moved behind his eyes, irritation sharpening into something closer to warning. But he said nothing, and she said nothing, and the hearing resumed where it had adjourned the previous afternoon with Swanson back in the witness box and the same smooth machinery turning over without friction. She gave it 20 minutes. Swanson was describing the moment of arrest, and he placed himself at the corner of Clement and 4th at 11:32 p.m., and Rebecca knew from the body cam timestamp analysis in her envelope that at 11:32 p.m. Edward Swanson's vehicle was parked outside a bar on Morrison Street 4.5 blocks away, because the footage existed and the metadata did not lie, and she stood up and said so. The room cracked open. Pierce's gavel came down so hard the water glass on the clerk's table trembled. He was on his feet before the sound finished reverberating. His face flushed from the collar upward, and he pointed at her with the rigid fury of a man who had never once been contradicted in his own room and did not have the emotional vocabulary to process it gracefully. 30 days. Contempt. The words landed like a closing door. The holding cell in the basement smelled of mildew and old concrete and something underneath both that she recognized as accumulated despair. 2 women were already inside. Gloria, 50s, arms folded, eyes that had seen the full length of what this system could do and had stopped being surprised by any of it. And Destiny, 19 years old, crying with the bewildered exhaustion of someone who had not yet learned to expect this. Rebecca sat down and introduced herself, and listened, and remembered every word. They gave her 1 phone call. Standard procedure. She thanked the processing officer with the same courtesy she would have extended to a colleague and asked for 2 minutes of privacy, and something in the way she asked it made him step back without quite knowing why. She called Judge Elaine Mercer first. Elaine had clerked for her in 1999 and had been on the federal bench for 11 years, and she answered on the second ring because Rebecca West calling after midnight meant exactly one thing. Rebecca spoke for 4 minutes without interruption, the case numbers, the timestamps, the pattern, the names, all 47 of them. When she finished, the silence on the other end lasted exactly 3 seconds. "I'll have someone at the DOJ Civil Rights Division before 7, Elaine said. "Send the file to my secure server the moment they return your phone." "It's already there," Rebecca said. "Has been since Wednesday." Another silence. Shorter this time. "Of course it has." She made the second call herself, directly to the duty officer at the DOJ Civil Rights Division, a tired-voiced man named Hargrove who became considerably less tired approximately 90 seconds into the conversation. She gave him the file reference number. She gave him Pierce's judicial ID. She gave him Swanson's badge number and the names of 3 witnesses she had spoken to on Clement Street who had never been contacted by anyone official despite filing complaints. Hargrove said he would make calls. Rebecca said she appreciated that, returned the phone to the officer outside the cell, and went back to the bench where Gloria and Destiny were waiting. "Everything all right?" Gloria asked. "It will be," Rebecca said, and closed her eyes, and by morning she already knew the ground was moving. They released her at 7:15 Saturday morning without explanation or apology, which told her everything she needed to know about what Elaine's calls had set in motion overnight. She went back to the motel, showered, and put on the same brown hoodie. She considered the blazer hanging in the narrow closet and left it where it was. She was not finished being underestimated. Not quite yet. Monday morning she walked back into courtroom 7 at 8:40, and this time 2 people were already seated in the gallery who had not been there before. A man and a woman, both in dark suits, both with the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who are present in an official capacity and are making no effort to conceal it. Federal Observer credentials clipped to their lapels. A court reporter Rebecca had personally requested through Elaine's office sat at a small table to the left of the clerk's station, fingers already resting on her machine. Rebecca took her seat in the last row. She watched Swanson enter from the side door and clock the 2 observers in the time it took him to cross the room. His stride didn't break, but something in his shoulders did. A barely perceptible tightening, a recalibration, the physical adjustment of a man who has walked into a room expecting familiar terrain and found it subtly, irrevocably altered. He sat down and did not look at the gallery again, which meant he could not stop thinking about it. Pierce entered from chambers and took the bench and saw the court reporter and the federal observers in the space of a single sweeping glance. He sat down carefully. He set his gavel down without using it. For the first time in 11 years, Harold Pierce looked small behind his own bench. Rebecca folded her hands in her lap and waited. Pierce made his move at 10:43. He had been cautious all morning, measured in a way that did not suit him, his usual easy arrogance dialed down to something approximating procedural correctness. But caution was not in his nature, and eventually the habit of 11 years reasserted itself. He looked at Marcus's file, looked at Swanson, and began moving the case toward verdict with the practiced efficiency of a man closing a door he had closed 1,000 times before, the federal observers notwithstanding. They were observers. They could watch. They could not stop him from ruling in his own courtroom. Rebecca stood up and walked to the bar. The room went absolutely still. She placed her federal judicial credentials on the edge of the clerk station, face up, followed by her bar card, followed by a document index, 47 pages tabbed and cross-referenced, and then the body cam drive in a clear evidence sleeve, a copy of the forensic timestamp analysis clipped to its face. "Your Honor," she said, and her voice carried the full weight of 3 decades on the federal bench, unhurried and immovable as stone. "I am retired federal judge Rebecca West. I am also the mother of the defendant. I am submitting into the record 18 months of documented evidence detailing a pattern of racially motivated arrests conducted by Officer Swanson, rubber-stamped by this court, and systematically buried at the precinct level." She paused. The body cam footage on that drive was deleted from the department server on the morning following my son's arrest. It was not deleted from the cloud backup Officer Swanson forgot he had enabled. Swanson's chair scraped the floor. Pierce did not move at all. The doors opened at 10:51. 4 federal marshals entered from the main entrance in a single, unhurried line, and 2 state investigators came through the side door simultaneously, and the precision of the timing made clear that this had been coordinated from outside the building long before the morning's hearing had begun. The gallery registered their arrival in a wave. Heads turning, bodies straightening. The collective intake of breath that precedes something that cannot be undone. Swanson stood up before they reached him. Rebecca did not know whether it was instinct or pride, the reflex of a man who had spent his career being the one who approached rather than the one who was approached. It didn't matter. The marshal's hand came down on his shoulder with quiet authority, and whatever Swanson had intended to do with standing dissolved immediately into the mechanics of custody. Wrists, cuffs, the brief procedural exchange of a man being formally separated from the life he had built. At the bench, Pierce had not moved. He sat with both hands flat on the wood before him, staring at a point somewhere beyond the courtroom, as though he were already trying to locate himself in a version of events where this was not happening. The state investigators reached the bench and spoke to him in low voices, and he rose from his chair with the mechanical compliance of a man whose body was cooperating while his mind was still negotiating. The gallery was packed. Families Rebecca recognized from the arrest files, faces she had never met but names she knew by heart. They rose without a word. Then, in the back row, someone began to weep, and the sound moved through the room like water finding its level. And within seconds it was everywhere, and no one made any effort to stop it. Marcus walked out of the Harlan County Detention Facility at 4:17 that afternoon, and Rebecca was standing in the parking lot when he came through the door, still in her brown hoodie, her hands in her pockets, and he stopped when he saw her, and something in his face moved through several things at once before it settled into the particular expression of a grown man who has decided it is acceptable, in this specific moment, to let his mother see him come undone. She held him for a long time without saying anything. The federal civil rights charges against Swanson were filed the following morning, 47 counts, each one carrying his name and badge number and the precise, documented weight of what he had done with both. Pierce's disbarment proceedings were initiated by the state bar before the week was out, the indictment following 9 days later, and when Rebecca read the filing she felt not satisfaction exactly but the cold, clean sense of a long equation finally balanced. On the last Friday of the month, she drove back to Harlan County alone. The courthouse was quiet in the late afternoon, the docket cleared, the halls emptying out. She walked into courtroom 7 and sat in the front row. Not the last row this time, but the first, and she looked at the empty bench for a while without any particular expression on her face. She thought about Marcus. She thought about Gloria and Destiny and the 46 other names in the file. She thought about 31 years of believing the system could heal itself from within and what it had cost to learn otherwise. Then she picked up her envelope, stood up, and walked out into the light. She had 47 appeals to begin. Let me know in the comments below if you enjoyed this story of hard karma and ultimate justice. Please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. We have plenty more tales of revenge, justice, and drama coming your way. Thanks for watching and see you in the next.